Okay, looks like we're going live. Now, we're not at the start of the presentation yet. Just wanted to jump in. There's always a little bit of lag time between what we're broadcasting on and YouTube. On my way driving home after appointments at the law office today, the sky was looking kind of angry and it really started blowing, and I started seeing like those outside really heavy trash cans, the lids popping off in a parking lot from a shopping center, and they were flying across the street. And I was getting a little worried at the wind, and so I'm starting to head home. I'm getting off the highway, and as I'm getting ready to make a turn into my complex, I'm looking behind me and I'm seeing all of this swirling wind and dirt and everything, and I was like, oh gosh, please tell me this isn't going to be a tornado setting down. So thankfully we didn't have any damage at the house, so we're just getting ready, getting warmed up now. Everything works. I was a little bit worried that we might not end up having an internet connection with all of that rain and everything else that was coming along. So all right, so we got just a minute. We're not going to jump right in. I hope everybody is having a fantastic week so far. It really is starting to feel more like spring. It was getting a little annoying waking up, going to the gym, and it's in the 30s outside. And then by the time the afternoon rolls around, it's in the high 70s. We were doing that for a little bit, but thankfully that's not something that we have to keep dealing with. I can't believe April's almost gone. It's practically May. But that's okay. That means that summertime's coming around. It's already baseball season, and I'm really kind of happy about that. Not so happy with the record the Durham Bulls have, but still thankful for that baseball season from starting. All right, so I'm seeing that we're about ready to start, and there's a little bit of lag time on YouTube, so by the time I start presenting the material, it's definitely going to be start time. So let me go ahead and start introducing the topic. This is revocable trust versus special needs trusts and ABLE accounts, and we're really going to talk about the core issues around estate planning when there's a beneficiary that needs to have their benefits protected, also known as special needs planning. So for this presentation, in the next 45 minutes or so, give or take, probably including some question and answer time, we're going to discuss the core functions of special needs estate planning, how to effectively preserve assets in the most efficient ways possible, and this becomes important. Sometimes something just kind of pops out and people say, oh wow, that looks great, but it might not necessarily be the most efficient way to do things. It's important to know about all the tools that are out there, how different planning tools work for different purposes, and why there is not a single tool that always covers everything. And one of those tools we're going to talk about was the ABLE accounts. That's something that I've been starting to get more and more questions on. Plus, we're going to have a live Q&A at the end, so we can take your questions and find out what's most important to you. And if you stay till the end, you're going to be given a link to download the slides from the presentation. So don't worry about taking too many notes, and we'll tell you how to get a coupon code for the Special Needs Planning Crash Course simply because you know Gabi. So this is a special presentation that we're putting on for Gabi's grounds and whomever they wanted to invite, so great. This is their presentation. So, who am I? Okay. I'm Jeffrey G. Marsacci. I'm the plain English attorney. I've been an estate planning attorney for, more than 26 years now. I'm a national lecturer, and I frequently, but prior to all of the lockdowns and everything else, I would annually end up doing a couple of topics at some national um, conferences, talking specifically about different types of estate planning and potentially Medicaid planning and other things. So a wide variety of topics, but always in that planning area. I'm an author of 9+ books on estate planning and related topics. And I'm the creator and producer of online courses that are available at plainenglishattorney.com. This is one of those things where I've realized that not everybody gets their education and does their research in the same way. So in addition to books, we're also trying to do video, and we're just getting started with a podcast as well. All right, so I have to read the standard disclaimer because this could be seen by people from across the country. This program is for general informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. No attorney-client relationship exists between the user or viewer of this video/webinar. Legal advice and perspectives among attorneys may vary, and legal advice is often different for different situations and for different people and purposes. For specific legal advice related to your particular situation, please contact an attorney in your state or jurisdiction. Copyright 2022, all rights reserved. All right, so what are the core functions of special needs estate planning? So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that first one because it really is more of a mindset that sometimes gets in the way of planning effectively, or at least planning as broadly as people need to be. If you have a child or a beneficiary who's receiving benefits for something, and it could be SSI, it could be Medicaid, and if they get some kind of inheritance that could push them over the mark, it could end up having to cause a big spend down, they could lose their benefits, and it just becomes this big mess to the point where some people say, oh, well, we can't leave anything to them. Well, no, you can, you just have to plan it effectively. But because of that specific risk, I sometimes have clients who aren't thinking about their whole overall estate planning, and this is just one beneficiary that has components. So it might be a bit of a mind shift. When we do estate planning, we try to take care of as much as possible. So we do get into who are your beneficiaries, not just the beneficiary that needs protection. Who's going to be an overall potential trustee? If you've got 3 kids but only one's receiving benefits and the other 2 might just have some age restrictions, but if they're still young, all right, well, the trustee isn't just overseeing an inheritance for a beneficiary who's receiving benefits. It's for all of them. So it might be just a little bit of a mindset shift. Some other core functions: provide an inheritance to a beneficiary needing those specific protections. And as I mentioned, not to their exclusion. A lot of people think that you can't give money or leave an inheritance to a beneficiary that is receiving benefits. And you can, it just has to be done the right way. And it's also about empowering control in trusted individuals, and not just, again, for your beneficiary who might be receiving benefits. When we're talking about estate planning kind of across the board, we're also talking about a parent or parents who's going to be protecting assets for them if they become incapacitated. So who's going to make healthcare decisions for them if they become incapacitated? If they pass on, how do assets get divided, and who are the people who are working to make that happen in exactly the right way? So all of that gets encompassed as some of those core functions of estate planning in general, but certainly in what we call special needs estate planning. You've got a beneficiary that's going to need ongoing supervision of their inheritance to make sure it's not going to jeopardize any of their benefits. So let's talk a little bit about effectively preserving assets, because it's not all the same. And there are some pretty big threats that are out there. One of the big ones is probate. There are a lot of downsides to the whole probate process. And if the plan is to leave assets through a last will and testament, well, all right, that means probate. So when assets go into probate, it has all of these inventories that need to be filed. You have to get statements, copies of canceled checks, and it's just this whole big paperwork load that you're having to put in, organize, and get it to the court. And there are 4 really big downsides. I'm only going to briefly cover them because I cover that in other videos and other topics, and certainly in the estate crash course and the special needs planning crash course. The 4 big downsides: 1, it's expensive. Probate generally eats up 4 to 10% of an estate, depending on the types of assets that go through it, and it usually eats up about, second big downside, 6 months to a year and a half, with most of them somewhere around a year. There's some that can go through in 4 or 5 months, but others that can just drag on for years. Third big downside, a loss of privacy. When assets go through probate and they're governed by a will, well, part of that paperwork and all those inventories is you have to list the names, ages, and addresses of the beneficiaries. And that's a public document. And I've seen the marketing people going through the new probate files and writing down names and addresses of people to put on their marketing lists. And then the 4th big downside, probate actually makes it easier to contest a plan. So if there's someone who doesn't like what's happening, they can just bang their fist on the table and get an attorney and, okay, I'm going to contest this whole thing. And then suddenly everything gets delayed even more, and it becomes this expensive, drawn-out mess. So probate is something most of my clients generally want to avoid. It's an efficiency thing. Now, very specifically, if we're talking about setting up a testamentary trust that's going to hold on to an inheritance for a beneficiary receiving special needs, now it's not just putting someone in charge of that. It's also having to go to the court at least every year, if not more often, provide, here's how all the money was spent, here's the copies of the canceled check. It's just this ongoing paperwork mill that the court is overseeing, because this trust is now overseen by the court. A lot of my clients, we'll get to revocable trusts, they use that as the way to keep it more private. Now, the big one, loss of government benefits. So that could be disability, and sometimes the big one is Medicaid as the health insurance, and you're only allowed to have so much money for certain benefits. The one number that I always remember, because I do a lot of Medicaid planning at the nursing home level too, it's this $2,000 limit on a checking account. You got to spend the money below that, otherwise your benefits end up being put into jeopardy. So if you leave an inheritance, it's got to be locked up pretty tight. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to the different tools that are out there and how those tools work. Government recovery of assets. Now, this is another big thing, because a lot of programs keep popping up that are kind of done with a government blessing, but a lot of those come with these strings attached, such as if there's any money left over, it's subject to recovery from the government for whatever benefits they might have paid out. And then the last one, effectively preserving assets, a another big risk is predators. Now, usually a lot of parents with beneficiaries who are receiving benefits, they talk to each other, they bounce things off of each other, and if there's a group that's really more out for themselves than they are for protecting their kids, they're going to know about it. But I know that it's out there, and one that popped up years ago and it just infuriated me. They were, oh yeah, we'll act as the trustee, we'll have the assets come in, we'll govern them and take care of it for your child, don't worry, we'll handle everything. And I read the fine print, and it turned out whatever services they felt that beneficiary needed, they would pay for out of the money. And, big surprise, they provided a lot of services. So if they, in their sole discretion, thought they needed 40 hours of occupational therapy a month, they could pay themselves for 40 hours, even if that's a ridiculous number. For occupational therapy, they could pay it and then drain the assets. I'm like, wait a minute. This is where an individual that you trust is probably more appropriate to be in charge of that money. And then they can hire the people to provide those services. All right, so let's talk about some of the different tools and what they do. All right, with a revocable living trust, the Revocable Living Trust is kind of the core general estate planning trust that we use. In a lot of cases, my clients, they're coming to me because they want to avoid probate. Well, how does a Revocable Living Trust avoid probate? The trust is set up. The people setting it up are the trustors. They're the trustees. They're the first level beneficiaries. And then all the estate stuff of what happens after they pass on is all written into the trust. But because there are assets that end up titled in the name of the trust, end up being the pay on death beneficiary for certain accounts and life insurance and things like that, all of that stuff ends up staying out of the probate court. Now, here's where it's really important when we're talking about, and I hear it all the time, oh, you need a special needs trust, you need a special needs trust. The revocable trust, that's not going to do it. You need a special needs trust. No. If you have the special needs provisions inside and drafted into that revocable living trust the way that my firm does it, you may not need a separate special needs trust. It's all the provisions are right in there in the revocable living trust. So now you're planning your overall estate plan using the revocable living trust and what I call the ancillary documents. And maybe I should have put that in as an additional tool. I'll talk about that as well. The revocable living trust is going to take care of all your beneficiaries. So if you have 3 children, one of them is receiving benefits, all right, we need to protect their benefits, but if you still want to split everything 3 ways, which a lot of my clients do, all right, we have age limits for beneficiaries, but if they're receiving benefits, okay, we have those special needs provisions drafted right into it. So their share ends up being in the control of a trustee so that they get what they need without tripping up their benefits. So that's an important one where we don't really need a separate special needs trust. Now, one additional piece to that is very often we will use what's called an IRA trust. So this is going to have me get into a few technical rules about inheriting retirement accounts. For spouses, if they end up inheriting a retirement account from their spouse, okay, they can do a rollover. and just take the money out on their age and their schedule. But for any other beneficiary, other than a couple of exceptions for minor kids and things like that, they have to pull that money out over a 10-year period. So if you've got those 3 kids, if they're old enough, you can name them, those 2 kids that aren't receiving benefits, to receive that money directly. So the pay on death beneficiary for the retirement account can be a third to child A, a third to child B. But child C is the one where we have to protect their inheritance from them losing their benefits. That's where we can set up an IRA trust just for them. So now that money is put into an inherited retirement account, an inherited IRA. That money has to come out of that account and be taxed as income over a 10-year period, but it stays within the confines of the IRA trust, so it doesn't go into that beneficiary's pocket and jeopardize their benefits. So when we're typically setting up, we've got the Revocable Living Trust. That's going to handle everything except IRAs, 401ks, and tax-deferred accounts, and even tax-free accounts like Roth IRAs. The IRA trust will protect that money and take the money out in as best tax-advantaged way as possible, and yet still protect and preserve those assets so they don't end up inadvertently having someone disqualified from their benefits. All right, so when actually do we need to have a separate special needs trust? There are a couple of circumstances where this makes sense. If you have another relative that may be leaving money to your special needs beneficiary. So in other words, all right, you've got your Revocable Living Trust. It's all set up. Maybe you've got an IRA trust, but you're not sending it to a separate special needs trust. You've got your estate plan, but it's maybe grandma or grandpa. They want to leave money specifically to your child who's receiving benefits. They don't want to leave the money to you so you could eventually leave it to them. No. It's got to go for my grandchild. That's when a separate special needs trust makes sense, because it's that inheritance from someone else that may be coming in. And it ends up being protected. Another one, and this gets to be a little more complex, so I'm only going to touch on it very briefly. And we used to do a lot of this when the estate tax limits were lower. Right now, we're at a point where, unless when you pass on everything you own and control is more than $12.06 million in 2022, you don't have to worry about estate taxes. In North Carolina, there's no state-level estate tax. Now, other states may have their own state-level estate tax, but the big one is typically the federal estate tax. And unless you've got more than $12 million, you don't have to worry about it. But it used to be a lot lower, somewhere between $600,000 and $1 million. It was that for several years. It's like, well, wait a minute, the economy's growing, money is growing. That could end up being you could be going over those amounts. And the estate tax was somewhere around 40% and up. All right, so we could use that separate special needs trust to own a life insurance policy, have the death benefit payable into that separate special needs trust, and it's irrevocable, and suddenly all that life insurance money is off the table. So if you've ever heard the term ILIT, or irrevocable life insurance trust, if you structure a separate special needs trust the right way, you can use it also as an ILIT, but your beneficiary, that money isn't going out to them. It's not just about estate taxes. It's about that money staying in more long term and being protected. All right. So now we're going to get into a couple of specialized things that I get questions on. All right. A D4A trust. Right. So what exactly is a D4A trust? This is kind of an emergency trust. This is for when you don't have time to do planning. And I see a lot of these being used if there's like a car accident, if there's medical malpractice. And what they want is the person who is suing and settling or getting a big judgment, they don't want their benefits going away because of this settlement. Now, if you really think about it, if there's Medicaid and there's disability, and it's because someone is in a big car accident. Let's just go with that example. And they're suing. The money that they may be settling on might not be enough if there are no benefits that go along with it. So the idea is the benefits plus whatever that lawsuit amount is going to be might be enough to take care of them. But if you get rid of the benefits, it won't. All right, so we're going to set up a D4A trust. It's an emergency thing. I kind of say, well, look, you don't want to necessarily be in a position of having to set up a D4A trust, but accidents happen, and that's essentially what it's for. It's that specific tool to make sure that those assets don't disqualify you from the benefits, but at the same time, now that money can be used for certain things without jeopardizing your benefits. The money can go in, and you keep your benefits and the awards there, so it's going to make your life a lot easier. But, and this is a big downside, if you pass on, the beneficiary, if they pass on, the money goes to pay back the benefits first. And often that could be well in excess of whatever money is left in there. So the idea is, well, you've got to use it or lose it, but who knows when you're going to pass on. So that money, you don't want to spend it too quickly, but at the same time, you might not want to leave anything left. And so, all right, you don't want to start out and say, yeah, I'm going to do some planning. I'm going to do a D4A trust. No, you're probably better off with the Revocable Trust and some of the other tools we've talked about. And here's also where we're getting to ABLE accounts, because this is a big thing. And I hear, oh, these ABLE accounts are great. They're fantastic. Well, yeah, but they're a very precise tool. So for this tool, a person who is receiving SSI, they're receiving Medicaid, and they can't, quote, keep too much in their checking account, so they can only work a certain number of hours per week. Otherwise, they go over the amount. They could lose their benefits. Well, the government stepped in and said, hey, wait a minute. Let's try this out. It's sometimes been called like a 529 for disabilities. Basically, you can shelter, the person who's working can put up to $16,000 per year into this account, and that's not counting towards whatever their limits are for their benefits. So, all right, they can put away more money, so that means they can work more. They can work more, accumulate more money inside this ABLE account. Now, what can you use that money for? Well, education, health and wellness, housing. You can tell some attorneys worked on that. Legal fees. Yes, that's a legitimate expense. You can use legal fees. Use that money on legal fees. Financial management. Well, okay. The financial management fees, if you're investing it, that's a legitimate expense of that account. It's not. So you can use that money for those purposes, which is great. All right. But just like with these D4A trusts, if there's any money left over, it goes back to pay back Medicaid and SSI and the other the other programs that paid out over the years. So if you accumulate a ton of money in there and don't use it, well, that money's just going back to the government. There might be a better way to do it. Now, because it's that precise tool, if you can put that $16,000 away each year, but try to spend close to that, making your quality of life a lot better, well then, all right, that's a definite win. Should any other people, and they're allowed to, put money into your ABLE account? Well, no. Why would they do that? They can, but why would they? If they can have the money put into some other kind of trust or some other kind of plan to benefit you. So in other words, oh, you need something, they can buy it without having to give you the money. It's just set aside, and then if they pass on, it goes where they want it to go, potentially to a separate special needs trust, or it's held in their revocable trust. That's probably a better way for other people to do the planning. The only real advantage if someone else is putting money into an ABLE account is that it grows, and as long as the income and as long as that growth ends up being spent on those legitimate expenditures, there's no income taxes on it. So that may or may not be a big enough benefit to justify the potential loss of the money going back to the government. So yeah, ABLE accounts, I think they're great for the people who are working and at the same time receiving disability and other Medicaid and other kinds of benefits. But I wouldn't necessarily look at that as an optimal way to plan to get money over to a beneficiary who's receiving benefits. There are other better ways, some of them being that Revocable Living Trust, a separate special needs trust. Those are some of the better tools for that type of job. All right, so what I'm going to do is just open it up for some question and answers. I've got Janelle checking in on the live chat. So we'll open that for some questions. I'm just going to give it about a minute or so. And what I'll do is talk about a couple of other things that we've got going on, specifically for Gabi's friends. All right, so if there are any questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. Okay, so we've got a question, putting this into the replay. What if none of the siblings of my child who's receiving benefits, what if they don't want any part of my estate? What do I do then? All right, first, make sure it's that they don't actually want your estate, or they would prefer that your estate stay with their sibling who's going to potentially need more support. The answer is probably, well, yeah, I wouldn't mind being a beneficiary, but I would rather that my sibling be taken care of. So once you've established if that is actually the case, then you can determine, all right, how do you want your beneficiaries to be laid out? Because one important thing that I do in my practice, and hopefully other attorneys doing estate planning will do this, they're not going to look at just, okay, this money goes there and it's allocated to this beneficiary and that's it. No, the contingencies have to be put in place. Well, what happens if they pass on before you do, but probably more likely and importantly, what happens if there's any money that's left over? This is particularly an issue because if what you've done is put money into some type of protective environment, whether it's terms within the Revocable Living Trust or it's a separate special needs trust, there's got to be contingent beneficiaries so that it goes somewhere. Maybe what this ends up being is the other kids are okay being contingent beneficiaries if anything happens down the road. So that can be built in. Well, all right, what if the answer is still no, we don't want any part of that? Okay, usually it's the first thing, but all right, what if it really is the case they don't want anything no matter what? All right, well, in that instance, potentially think about nieces or nephews, or for a lot of my clients, they start looking at charities. And if that's what the beneficiary is going to be, make sure that's also built in. So you've got to look at these other different contingencies. We can start to get into some very creative stuff. Well, what if you want just your tax deferred money to go to charities? And maybe you want some of the other money to go to those kids who don't want anything, with their understanding that, okay, here, I'm giving you this money so you can give it to charities and take some of the tax deductions over a number of years. When it comes to choosing who gets your money, it's almost limitless in what you can do. When you're talking about a beneficiary who's receiving benefits, those options are still there, but how you do it is what becomes important. So thank you for that great question. All right. Well, then let me talk about this special coupon that we're providing. The Special Needs Planning Crash Course is out there. It talks an awful lot about this. It's specialneedsplanningcrashcourse.com. So you go there, you'll get the coupon code in an email sent to you if you've joined this broadcast. So you'll get that special coupon code. And this program contains problems and myths in planning, choosing financial agents, and some different criteria that I've seen over the years and what makes sense. The toolbox of legal documents and techniques. So we're not just talking about some of those tools we were just speaking about, but power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, and even, well, what documents does my adult child need? Not just me doing my planning, what do they need? So planning by the beneficiary receiving benefits. And a kind of briefing for the successor trustee. Now, I'm also going to have Janelle get you the information. This is a paid course. You're getting a great coupon. I think it's worth it rather than trying to do a whole bunch of research and curate it. But we've also got a free webinar. So that can answer a bunch of at least the preliminary questions, if not go into a ton of depth. So I'm going to have Janelle also put that out there. So that again, that webinar is free. That comes with its own coupon too. All right, so get started now for only $197, well, with 30% off with the coupon code that goes through. And at the same time, yeah, check out that free webinar. You might as well. Hey, it's free. All right, so we're going to see if there are any other questions in the chat. We'll see if Janelle can get those over to me, and I'm checking the chat as well. All right, I'm not getting any questions yet, but I'm going to talk a little bit about a case that we worked on, oh gosh, for many years, and this is just kind of an unfortunate thing. It was grandparents actually had custody of their grandson. They were the ones really looking out for him and taking care of him. Their entire estate plan was set up exactly right to protect his assets. And I guess this is more the cautionary tale of, look, get an attorney, use the attorney, and make sure the attorney is on top of everything. rather than you trying to do something yourself. We had everything all set up exactly the right way, and unfortunately, they just, I don't know if it was some moment of panic, they just hand wrote out that they want this particular change and it's canceling these other trusts. That's not what they meant, to just get rid of the trust altogether. It was to not have this other trust control this specific account. And what ended up happening is that was taken as a writing revoking their entire plan. And so now everything is up in the air and it's in jeopardy. So doing it yourself might not be the best thing. All right, so let's see. Doesn't look like we have any questions in the chat at the moment. But if there are other questions that come up, please feel free to send them in to us. We'll give it a few more minutes. I can tell you one of the great things is when, unfortunately, these plans end up working because somebody's passed on. But seeing the relief on like a new guardian's, or it may even be a sibling who's just there to look out for their sibling because the parents passed on but they'd left a bunch of money, and they realize, oh wow, they're not going to lose their benefits at all. Everything worked out exactly as it needed to. Here are the steps that need to happen. And they may end up, a sibling may end up being that long-term trustee, at least at the start, and their job's easy. That's part of the reason that I do what I do. I like to plan things ahead to avoid problems so that you don't end up in probate. You don't end up with benefits being in jeopardy. You don't end up having to lose more money than necessary. It's all protected, it's all preserved, and your beneficiary is going to be okay for a long, long time to come. All right, so I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. So I want to thank everybody for joining us for this webinar. If you do have any additional questions that come up, please just let us know. Now, what I always tell my clients is please stay safe, plan ahead, and enjoy life. And whatever you do, make it a great day. Thanks, everyone.